We can use the analogy of being the pilot of the plane and the storms coming up front.
Let's be honest, the systems are fundamentally, I was going to say broken, but they're fractured at best. Disability in education is disgusting, if I'm going to be frank. I think that's why we're here as humans, is actually to leave the place better than what we find it.
People are still, at this stage, most of the people are talking at the board level. How does AI governance look like for them?
AI and using it properly will allow us to give more time to our people to do what they care about, which is serve others. We don't talk to them about replacing jobs. It's a reinforcement of the culture that we want. The biggest skill that we will need in the next 10, 15 years is...
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Hi Mark, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I think the last one we did, we headed at TSH with bunnies in the backdrop.
I think we
Big
did.
teddies.
We did. And I think we've done, this is probably my third, I think. The first one we did was in Northbridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
But thank you for the third one. Thank you for the third one coming.
Thanks for keep inviting me to come back. Obviously, I'm not doing too badly.
No, I've been observing your, not the career trajectory, but the evolution of your thought leadership, what you write, and I recently read your LinkedIn publications on the way you think, and I can see the clear evolution of the leadership style you have, which I talked probably 3 years ago with you. I would like you to give us your journey broadly from a point of view of your evolution from purpose, values, and leadership.
Oh wow, okay, big things to talk about. I suppose when I reflect on my journey, I do consider myself extraordinarily fortunate. I'm fortunate from being in the right place at the right time in many instances, but also fortunate from the perspective of certain sort of value sets being sort of honed right from a child and understanding my place, I think, in the world is to try and make it better. I think that's why we're here as humans, is actually to leave the place better than what we find it. And so to have some leadership roles in the sectors in which I've worked, I think's been really quite purposeful for me, but also very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very humbling, and also something that I treasure strongly. The ability to be able to, whether it's be a voice for somebody who doesn't have the power of that voice, or to look after somebody who needs some care in that moment, or indeed to look after someone else's child. There is no better privilege in life than that. And then to be able to try and make sure that we lead in the way where we have this collective of people all trying to make the community better is something really important for me. And from my first foray as a CEO, as CEO for Vinnie's, and that footprint of a wonderful organisation, then moving into telethon speech and hearing, or TSH, and that being able to then hopefully support an organisation who needed some assistance to get it back on track, because the services it was providing were fantastic to families. To then be able to take some of those histories, whether it's the housing interface at Vinnie's and before, or the therapy side of things for kids, understanding the disability space and the housing space and the health space in different ways, and then bringing that together within a group setting where we can sit there and go, we've got these skills and we can see their needs in the community. How do we use our skills really well, and how do we actually then do that in a way where we are the partner that people want to work with? How do we do that without ego? How do we do that understanding where we do and don't add value, because we shouldn't be all things to all people? And then how do we think differently about solutions? Because let's be honest, we wouldn't be in the business that we're in if everything worked before. It does work on a micro level, don't get me wrong. We see the benefits of what we do with people every single day, but the systems are fundamentally, I was going to say broken, but they're fractured at best.
Very kind for the system. So from there, I think, when you took this most recent role of the group CEO of People Kind Group, And then we can use the analogy of being the pilot of the plane and sitting in the cockpit. How does the handover process can be smoothened out? Because if you are midway in the air and the pilot says, there's a new pilot coming in to fly the plane, because the handholding process or handover process to smoothen the jerks and the storms coming up front. How do you manage that, and how do you analogize that through the plane example?
Yeah, so the plane example is one where I think I've gone from the cockpit to the flight tower, so you see all these planes taking off and landing as opposed to be responsible for the singular plane. In terms of that transition though, I'm really fortunate to come after Gordon, who set up the group and had been involved in Nelson. I think he'd been CEO there for over 30 years and had done some amazing work. So you have a legacy that you then have a privilege but also an onus to continue. And for someone who's been there for so long and having some staff who've been involved in the group for quite a while, there's always going to be some bumpy parts of getting someone new. And what does that look like? The key thing, I think, when you step into an organisation is you have to understand where it's at and what makes it special and leverage that speciality or the areas in which it focuses, as opposed to necessarily stepping into something and then automatically wanting to make change. Change will come. And change sometimes is around mindset. It's often, we see CEOs go in and make structural changes and bring in their people because they want to. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the way that we should always work. I think organisations have been successful for a reason. Let's work that out. Let's understand our people. Let's activate them the best we can. And you've got to be authentic in that. And that's, I don't need to be, in my case, Gordon, or have someone be me at TSH. I think they've got to be able to create their own path, but also understand what's happening on the ground and why we do what we do. And the supports that our team gives a whole array of people they're just brilliant. So my job is to allow them to do that more and better and remove some of the hurdles. So I certainly don't need to get in their way.
The group CEO model, you're running into multiple funding streams and multiple, compliance and regulation environment. So how can a CEO from that structure point of view either step up or step in to those sectors and then have a deeper understanding of things? So when do you step up or step out, or step in to that sector specifically and then go knee deep and get dirty with the compliance and regs? So when do you take that decision, and then what are those scenarios you would either step in or step out?
Yeah, the context of each of those decisions is actually a really important one. We use the phrase lean in and lean out. In some respects, there is a consistency with the board role in some cases. So each of our organisations have their own leadership, their own CEOs or managing directors, and so it's the ability to understand and go lean in and say, okay, either it's help or advice or support, and then it's stepping back to not get in their way. As group CEO, I don't need to be knee deep in terms of any of those regulatory frameworks. I need to understand them, and I need to understand what pulls them together from that perspective. But to have, for example, the NDIS audit on one hand, mental health on another, RTO registration on another, I need to know that those frameworks are in place, and I need to make sure that we've got the standards to achieve what we need to achieve. And those standards are our minimum, and it's not an aspirational goal, it's a minimum for us. So understanding that we've got the right structures in place to achieve that's the critical piece, and then supporting our team to make sure that we can actually deliver what we should be delivering at the quality that we should, in a way that we can be here tomorrow.
The new language of the care sector, or the care economy, is coming into play, and there was this paper published by the Prime Minister and Cabinet on a strategy for care and support economy. Now that is a final strategy which talks about the care and support economy in the longer term vision is to have early childhood disability and aged care and veteran affairs to create some kind of parallels across these sectors, whether it's compliance, quality safeguarding standards on all those lines. And the work has already been done in aged care and disability to draw parallels. How do you see, from a care and support sector point of view, the alignments and the misalignments, or the risks and the challenges to bring these together or keep them separate entities?
Well, I think it depends on which part. So the assumption that we are all in care means that we have the same drivers from our staffing perspective, or we have our same drivers from business models, and that's not true. We've seen examples in other sectors where things work really well. So the registration of the professional body to make sure all registration in the health practitioners through APRA was a really good example of where you can actually centralise something and create a consistent process. Albeit they're not responsible for service delivery. They do have an overlay. Someone's actually stepping outside their professional boundaries and can remove registration, which I think works really, really well. My concern around the care economy piece of centralising some parts is that then government simplifies things in the wrong way. They take parts. It's like playing tennis matches on two different courts. You're still playing tennis, but it's a different game, and you can't hit them across the courts and then expect people to be playing different games on different courts. Let alone sometimes playing squash on one court and tennis on another, if you want to use a sporting analogy. I think there are abilities to see how we can actually do the regulation part really, really well, because there should be some consistencies in that. We are talking about vulnerable human beings. And how do we make sure that the quality of service delivery is there, but also those checks and balances are in place? And we saw that horrible outcome in Victoria around the childcare sector. And I should note that I'm on the board of a childcare organisation as well. So you see that horrific stuff happening. We've heard the Disability Royal Commission, we've heard the Aged Care Royal Commission. The standards around quality systems are largely the same. They're just worded differently. So sure, we can have a look at how we can do that. The word of caution, I suppose, comes into two parts. One is, at the moment, our sectors are funded extraordinarily differently and have different drivers. So how do we make sure that that nuance is kept to get good outcomes for the people that we serve? But also, the workforce is different. And I was lucky enough to talk to someone from the Australian Treasury Department about this, and they were talking about aged care and disability and should we make them consistent. The drivers for someone to want to work in disability compared to working in an aged care facility, let alone compared to community care, is very, very different. So we need to be mindful around that. We've got different employment markets that sit within all of that care economy, and if we try and homogenise that, I think we'll lose significant strengths that we should have within that sector.
Because early this year, when Dr. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer of Australia, had presented an economic reform roundtable, and before that he had two press club addresses in which he's been regularly referring the word care economy, and as one of the priority sectors in which the funding has to be productivity, and all those conversations happening. So from a treasury or a treasurer point of view, it is seen as one collective to prioritize things as well. So I thought that's a good point you raised from there.
We are the biggest employer in the country. So the sector is, by headcount, the largest employer. Probably the least paid as well, for that matter. Let's be frank about that. So if the government really wants to start to pull this together, let's actually break down which bits should be, but also, again, understand the nuances. Governments are horrible about designing systems that interface. So while we talk about, let's say, disability, aged care, childcare, the interface between disability and hospital systems are horrible. Disability in education is disgusting, if I'm going to be frank. The ability then to bring people through that and actually have a look at a human being that's in front of you, and what's that trajectory look like for somebody? Well, we've got to actually start to do better in that space. I understand that if we can create efficiency so we have less money coming out of the public purse from a compliance perspective, sure. The irony of all of this is only 7% of NDIS providers are registered. And yet the government's doing nothing about that. So let's put the priorities where they should be and make sure that we've got the resources to get this sector right so we get the best outcomes for people.
Can I delve a bit more with the interface? The government is not feel challenged when they work on projects to interface between two. And how does when the funding streams are, one is state-led, and one federal government-led, because health is primarily state, and then in DIS and disability aged care is...
There's the difference though, Dev. That's the feds actually fund more than 50% or 50% of our health budget.
Yeah.
So if we sit there and say that we as a community are going to accept the fact that we have two levels of government that can't sit in a room and work together.
Not accepting the fact, but yes, in terms of operations of it, because the managers are here.
Yeah, I actually think that we need to bring it back to what's our philosophy of service delivery in this country. So there are parts where there are throughputs in terms of identifying need, and identifying need in Carnarvon is going to be very different than in Bairnsdale in Victoria in terms of the community. How do we do that planning really, really well? How do we make sure that those services are locally based? Canberra, dare I say, do that poorly. The federal government, by and large, does that poorly, and I think we've seen that since we've moved to the NDIS as an example. We don't see that understanding of how do you commission locally based solutions and works and programs that actually meet specific community needs. The purview is, this is Australia-wide, so therefore it should be fine. We haven't seen really good examples of whether that's happened. And so I do think that we have to have a really mature conversation and take the politics out of what the state government's better at, what's the federal government better at, how do we enable funding potentially through a federal government pot where states are then held to account for administering it to meet the needs of its citizens. I understand then that has some difficulties when you're going across New South Wales, Victoria border or New South Wales, Queensland, and in WA we're a little bit protected from that.
Yeah.
But I do think we've got to actually understand what those key government functions should be and then make sure our programs are aligned accordingly.
Sometimes with the feds, they will pick up a priority and then create a national cabinet around it. So you have all the state ministers join the national cabinet of a problem which is of priority. Yes. And then they would meet, depending on what the scope of the role is. But do you think, are those the right platforms to solve into government, interstate, and in the departmental interface from a care point of view?
Yeah, I think that there should be. I think we do need to understand how these things can work. I do think that there's a difference, though, between control and input, and control and planning. So what does that actually look like, really, in a holistic sense? Because going back to my example before, if I'm looking at health, disability and education, three of us biggest sectors, obviously education not being in the health space though, but the interface with those is not particularly good. Used to be a little bit better in WA, but how do we actually make those work really, really well collectively? Because we know that every person that sits within the disability space will actually interface with the education space and the health space at some point. Same with childcare, and then aged care's coming through that. And housing. So where does that sort of integrated planning piece sit? I don't think we've landed that really well, and I don't think there's a really simple answer either. But I do think that we should encourage our federal and state parliamentarians to actually sit and have very strong conversations around how we can have the best impact for our community.
This highly hyper-complex problem, to explain the challenge through political advocacy or grassroots campaigning or through lobbying groups, if there are, to a politician or ministers who might not have that sectoral experience or might not have any lived experience at all, just through stories. And it's good to get up at the parliament and tell a story about John from this town, and it's easy to tell those stories through to win an argument in the parliament for that piece. And sometimes I feel that it's not rightful that you can't use one person's story and then just to elaborate, just to evidence your agenda or line of attack on the argument, because it's more nuanced than just John's story.
Oh, look, there is certainly part of that. I think it does help simplify some of the messaging that focus that a parliamentarian wants to give, and often is used to take the heat off as opposed to get the best outcome. The political nature of such is that we're also not creating any long-term, I don't think, what's the long-term statesmanship? Where do we want to get as an outcome? And how do we step back from that? And what we're seeing more recently is our parliamentarians are not adjusting to the media cycle, whether that's mass media, social media, whatever, around being able to tell the story. We actually want to be here. This is what we want to stand for. And we are going to work with that. Now, people can decide whether they like it or not, but at least they can understand how things fit together. At the moment, we don't see that cohesion. That sits across, this is what we want to stand for. So regardless of what happens in question time, which we know is largely a zoo.
A theatre.
Yeah, a theatre. I do think that we need to actually say, well, what's the stuff that we should be delivering on from a political realm, and set that course. It's a 10, 15-year course. And particularly if we're going to break the intergenerational parts of what some of our society is looking at. And the housing crisis, I think, will become intergenerational now. If it's not already, it already is, but even more so. Outcomes for First Nations people, you know, the fact that we need to sit alongside with them and have a look at this from a long-term perspective. The way that we actually have a look at poverty in this country. There's a whole range of things that we need some longer-term goals and targets, and then a pathway to get there. Understanding that they might be voted out, and that's actually okay.
And that's the intent, just if talking for Force Australians, it's called Closing the Gap report. It's not called Close the Gap. So closing is a continuous, whereas closes, you know, the intent is very clear what you said. As a leaders, we want to say, we want to close the gap, we want to just bring parity across. So that's also probably reflected in the ongoing challenges of, because I think the politics of division is lazy, politics of integration is difficult. So it's also easy to give labels to boxes of people, and then one label which I disagree with completely is CALD.
It's a homogenous group.
Heterogeneous
obviously. Yeah, so hang on a second. How is this collective of people? We talk about the disability sector. It's not a uniform, simple example of one group of people. We do this consistently and incorrectly. It makes it easier though, and that's why they do it. I totally disagree with this continuing label of, and it creates a lack of understanding about the needs of people. We know, and there's a whole pile of research that looks at if we can actually solve some of the fundamental causes of why we exist. Our tax system will be easier. We get better outcomes as a community. We're happier, healthier, all of that sort of stuff. But our governments, for argument's sake, don't do much, let's say, in the preventative health space. Yet we know preventative health is the biggest outcome for any future state that we're going to have in terms of our health system. Yet we have the health system that's broken across the country. So, yeah, something's got to give differently, though, in terms of understanding what's the long term, what are we going to invest in now, understanding that investment will take some time. But we're just so caught up in this political gamesmanship, I think, that sits, and it doesn't matter it's state or territory, where we're not then creating that long-term vision for our community.
Other challenge I feel is, from a public policy point of view, the silo of disability is one peak body, aged care is another peak body, early childhood is another peak body, and across all care sectors, they have their own scope of works to what to advocate for. But what we're talking here is intra-government, departmental and interstate kind of a conversation to be had federally and then statewide, so that you can solve these intersectional issues. So because those peak bodies or policy bodies, people who are writing policy work or doing advocacy are sectoral rather than inter, how do you see the sector can come together, or sectors can come together, having that broad national conversation? Oh,
look, I think the advocacy side of things sometimes is actually a reflection of the sector and the way the politics is working. Sectorial advocacy wouldn't happen in the same way if the structures weren't what they are. The challenge is, how do you change it? And I think that we within the sectors also have to take leaves out of our own, different books ourselves. We can't sit there, and fair part of my organisation actually has a look, for argument's sake, at the disability side of things. The Disability Royal Commission sits there and you go, hang on a second, but what actually happened in the Finance Royal Commission that we should be aware of, and the Aged Care Royal Commission and the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse? Where's the themes that actually build better outcomes? Because you can actually take, even in the Finance Royal Commission, you can take stuff out that actually applies in aged care. So we need to make sure that we lead the way that we want our political class, if you like, to lead and to consider things, and the interface that actually happens in that space. Have you considered, question mark, is actually a really strong question. And I'll give you an example. When I was at TSH, I was in a national conversation in Canberra, and one part of the health department, or health and ageing, I think it was called then, was changing the IT system for people who were having hearing checks. And that system, because there is a voucher system and it's regulated and all that sort of stuff. And I asked the question, so does this interface with the My Health record?
Simple question.
Which is run by the same department.
Yeah.
And the answer was no. And I said, you're kidding. And I said, you're not going to send me any Christmas cards anymore, are you? And that was the outcome, because they're so siloed in their thinking that we've got to ask questions and we've got to lead. I think if we, within the sector, lead those broader questions about, for argument's sake, okay, SDA housing is not being planned the way it should be. What's the solution? How do we actually ask the questions? I don't think it's incumbent on any one of us to find solutions. I think this should be, let's make sure that we ask questions collectively, because then we'll start to work on the right answers. Because I don't think we're working on the right answers at the moment. So if you ask the wrong question, you're not going to get the right outcome.
And it's the game played across the political class, both sides. And the loudest voices when you're not in power, from the advocacy point of view, when the other party comes in power, they get absorbed into the department and get a job, and then the loudest voice has gone over the voice which was independent and clear what the outcomes they want. So how do you see that the big advocates being consumed into government roles, and then that voice is just because that's individual leadership at some level, but when those individual advocates who are the loudest and clear out in public, when they get absorbed into public service?
I think it's not necessarily about what who goes where, or indeed whether it's a larger advocacy group or a smaller advocacy group. I think what we should be holding whether it's our policymakers or government ministers to account is, how are they getting their information? So they should be overtly sitting there and saying, we're getting our main information from a range of sources. I actually think there's some benefit at times for lobbyists or advocacy groups to actually understand the mechanisms of a government agency. Similarly, I think the shoe on the other foot is exactly the same. What actually happens in service delivery land, if we're not taking people who are long-term public servants and actually embedding them into a service to understand what decisions that they're making and how it affects people, then I think we're missing an opportunity. And how do we actually change that narrative? If we did the design and questioning right, then we need less of that, because we are seeing, you do see, 20, 30, 40-year public servants, which is fine. I'm happy that people do that work. But we've got to make sure they connect with the current context that they're in, and make sure that we are thinking about things in a way that is connected, impactful, positively, making sure that they're positively impactful, and then can last. So the public service is a vehicle in some respects to get past this minutiae of time that we are looking at from a political perspective.
Have you benchmarked the models of care, or the care models, across the Western world or European nations or Scandinavian countries? Are any models of care we can learn from other countries?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the other part of that, though, is there's the learning from other countries, and there should also be a pride in some of what we do.
Yeah.
You know, our model of Medicare, for argument's sake, while it's not perfect, is a really good model that the rest of the world actually focuses on. So we do some really good stuff here in Australia, and I think we need to be mindful of that. There are examples where, you know, how do we do justice better? And there are some examples, really great examples in the Nordic countries around that. How do we do homelessness better? How do we do education better? What's that stuff, though, that would work in our context? Where are the really good examples of how First Nations people have been involved in design of programs and initiatives? I mean, I still think that the referendum outcome was a disservice to our country about where we should be. And I don't need to get into the politics of that, but I do think we had a chance there where we could actually build something together and actually create a long term where my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids would actually live in a community that we don't have as much divisiveness as we do, I think, today. But that aside, I think that there are examples across the world where there are pockets of things that we need to explore, but we also need to explore it not just in that pocket, but it's how the mindset that goes across parts of service delivery and that interface actually exists really well. Because often I think as providers we'll go and have a look at something and it's, again, narrow purview. How do we actually make sure that we broaden that view out? And where does this interface? How does that work? Where are the things that don't work well so we don't replicate the mistakes? Because often we learn more from our mistakes than we do our successes. And, you know, how do we make sure that, again, the political class that may actually hold some purse strings don't sit there and go, oh, we see that bit, that's a nice shiny bit over here, let's just do that bit, but without understanding that architecture that actually happens around that initiative or program. And indeed, the very first social impact bond in not Newpin, that was Australian, the Peterborough model in the UK around that social justice, the justice reinvestment piece around reducing reoffending rates. Yeah, the story is that it was working, and so the government took a layer out of it, actually understanding the fabric that sat behind it. We've got to understand the fabrics of things to actually then at least acknowledge where we're going to influence. I'm not sure we do that really well.
From a point of view of, because the evolution of tech before the conversation we were talking about, the evolution of tech is coming, and data has become the key assets for an organization like yours and many more. And how are you interacting with AI as an organization, and how are you using AI for productivity gains and making sure that the sense of care stays versus the sense of tech should not overtake the idea of care?
The answer in a word, I think, is healthily. I think we're stepping into AI trying to make sure our team is inquisitive. What can this do? What's the possibilities that sit behind this? How do we invest and back our staff to make the best use of technology, whether it's AI or anything else for that matter? And what does that look like? Because it's easy to sit in my office and make decisions for 1,300 people, and that's never going to work. Let's be honest. We want our people to enact with it and do it safely, put the right structures around them, get them to play with things to see what's working. So I think we've taken a mindset where we understand that this can be a tool that actually will provide better outcomes for us and for our clients, and I'll get to that in a sec. But also we need to do it where we're not going to do something silly like put private information up on ChatGPT, as we know other organisations have done. So we need to make sure that our staff understand what the risks are and how do we actually mitigate those. From delivering a health outcome or a healthy outcome, I said this the other day in another forum, AI and using it properly will allow us to give more time to our people to do what they care about, which is serve others. And so that doesn't matter if it's in a disability space where we're doing handover notes. How do we minimise that time so we provide more care? If it's a speech therapy session, how do we maximise the time we have in front of a child, using that example, so we minimise the care note burden that puts on our staff so we don't burn them out and they do what they love. So I think the efficiencies that can come from AI and technology should, if we're doing it properly, allow our teams to do the things that actually get them out of bed every morning more and less of the stuff that sits behind the scenes, because no one wakes up and goes, oh, yep, I'm a support worker, but I'm going to go and do notes today. That's going to make me really happy. We actually want them to do what they do really well. So AI is going to be part of a tool. We need to make sure that we can harness what that looks like. I think the data mining that happens, and I think our sectors, AI gives us, I think, a cheaper, dare I say, a cheaper point of entry into some of that data mining space and the use of data, whereas before you've relied on clunky big systems to do some of that work. I think we can actually reduce that and with speed. So it makes it a little bit more accessible. But the use of data sets, I think, is going to be critical for not just having a look at what we do well, it's actually having a look at how we staff really effectively, how we design our services, how we create interfaces with other people, because we're not the only supports for anybody that we help with. So if we've got someone who has an intellectual disability that requires 24/7 support, they're still going to need a GP. How do we have that interface working the best it can? So we can be getting the best health outcome for that person and respecting that multiple actors, players, support providers, whatever phrase that we want, then actually can get the best for them as well. And I think it's possible.
I think you clearly landed very clearly on the use of AI at the front line, but people are still at this stage. Most of people are talking at the board level. How does AI governance look like for them? What are those conversations you've had with both the board and the multiple boards you interact with? And what's your observation on understanding of board members and their, as you said, that people should be able to test and play with it safely. So how do you bring that mindset up at the board level? Yeah, so the view of AI should reflect the culture that you have within your organisation. So if you're looking to try and, so we've taken the view that if you're looking to try and create some different way of approaching AI than you do other things, the disconnect in your culture is going to stop you from doing that really effectively. So we've been considered, and that's the approach, and why I said we're healthily having a look at that. And we've had that conversation at board level. We've got an AI policy that we know is going to work for now, but is going to be out of date. So we'll continue to have a look at this. We'll continue to keep abreast of what's going on around the place. We have ways that we make sure our enterprise-based solutions around that can limit risk, but still provide that healthy interaction with it. Our board's aware of how we're going through that. We're also going through an ISO review around our cyber stuff, so we can make sure all of these things interface. So at the back end, our boards are aware of what's happening to try and support our organisation more broadly, AI being part of that. And then, so the board sits there and has conversations about the important parts of that. Is, okay, how do we make sure that we protect the people that we serve? How do we protect our organisation using AI? What are the safeguards that we have in place? How can we actually create good outcomes for for us all? They're the big picture conversations that we have, not necessarily do you have an AI policy that says that you shall only use Copilot Enterprise or anything like that. Well, those decisions are made. So there's still an emerging part of that. Am I suggesting that we've got it perfect? No, because it's one of those emerging areas that we're going to have to keep an eye on and make sure that we actually continue to evolve our thinking. The board's really healthily asked lots of questions. And I think that challenge thinking, how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with that? What does that look like? They haven't gone into solutions or haven't gone into I don't like ChatGPT, I like Gemini. None of that conversation happens around our board, which is great. It's around making sure that we can get the best from what is a tool in the toolkit in a way that we need to do it safely. Because as and when you bring something new as tech to the organisation, there is the biggest hiccup is the change conversation happening. The culture, or the adapting of the new tech within the organization. What kind of feedback have you received from your team in terms of adapting?
We actually we have a wonderful CTO that works with us, and the first thing that he did is created a bot. Well, not the first thing, but one of the early parts of that journey for us. He created a bot, and that bot goes through every single policy. So you can imagine having 7 organisations, 1,300 staff or thereabouts, delivering services, and you have quality frameworks where you need policies and the like in terms of service delivery. Well, if you're working in area A, how do you know which one reports to you? Do you have to keep fossicking through things? Well, he's made it easy by creating a bot which identifies what your protocols for login and that sort of stuff. So if you're part of one organisation, then you get the policies for that organisation, and then you can type it in and get an outcome. So we simplify the use of AI using the policy framework, so I don't have to know where I have to look. All I know is I can pop it in there, and it gives me the right outcome. So that being deliberate about providing something that's so simple, but so necessary across all of our workforce says, hey, look, this is how we're going to step into it. Let's actually see what else we can use it for, and have conversations around that. And ask questions, and that's the big part, is show them that there is an opportunity to use it. So we take fear out of that equation. We don't talk to them about replacing jobs, because in our sector that's unlikely to happen at all. And then sit with them and say, okay, well, if we need to have a look at how do we do case notes, what's the tech solution that we should be looking at? How do we actually have a look at that with you guys as opposed to impose it on them? So, it's a reinforcement of the culture that we want. It's not something that sits separate.
In conclusion, if you can talk a bit more strategic level, what do you see in terms of next 4 or 5 years? Critical masses of work to be done in the sectors you operate in, and the focus areas, not just for the sector, but from the politicians' point of view, and public service.
I always say if I've had the answer for that, I'd probably be running for Parliament, but I don't really want to do that at all. Some people do that better than me. I think the key areas for us to have a look at, we know, if I look at the key areas that we work in, and maybe break that down a little bit, be a bit more tangible. We talked about disability. We have a housing organisation, including a real estate agency, which is really interesting. We have justice, kids coming out of care. So we are talking largely, if you want, from that vulnerable Australian's perspective. And then we see a health system that's broken. And that worries me. For a country so affluent as us, to see a public health system that has such high wait times, I think we're going to have, particularly when it comes to kids, a generation of kids that are worse off than the ones before if we're not careful. So what will we deal with? We'll deal with, I think, the political landscape where we're not going to get that long-term view. So we're going to have to try and tap in and be a conduit for that for members of our community who need supports. We're going to have to try and get ways for the government to actually have a look at different incentives to improve supply of housing, because housing is the fundamental thing that brings us all together. We would advocate strongly for a lot of design that's co-design work that sits in service delivery, as opposed to coming out of, whether it's Geelong, Canberra, Perth, it doesn't really matter, and work hard to be a way to bring that together. For People Kind Group, one of the key things that we will be doing is having a look at how we bring those skill sets to bear. And so an example that we've started with the health system is, how can we move some of those people who are long-stay hospital patients who don't clinically need to be in a hospital into a different environment to allow throughput until those people go home. And so I think there are avenues for us to step into spaces that we haven't traditionally stepped into and help government find solutions for things, even be on trial basis so they can scale up later, and be that partner that government goes, okay, hang on a sec, well, let's ring Mark because we know his team will approach this, and they'll also tell us if they can't do it. So I think for us, we're seeing how we'll continue to embed our service delivery. Our quality standards are extraordinarily high, and we will not resolve from that. And that's going to be a challenge in some of the funding models that we've got, so we're going to diversify some of those. And I think the sector needs to. It's going to be hard, though, for parts of our sector, and we'll probably consolidate. I think there will soon be a consolidation of providers in the next 4 to 5 years, and I think that's a deliberate strategy in some respects from the government too.
Before I let you go, have you introduced AI to your kids?
Yes.
How are you going?
Good. It was actually fascinating. Even before AI, I was having a conversation with my son. We just finished having a hit of golf, driving range stuff. And he was trying to explain to me, he asked me if I knew why we had 18 holes in a golf course.
He was explaining to you?
Sorry?
He was explaining to you, or you were?
He asked me the question, Dad,
Okay.
do you know why we have 18 holes in a golf course? And one of the things that came up on TikTok was apparently it was how many drinks were in a Scotch bottle. And I said, are you sure? Have you checked that? And he said, no. And I said, so we Googled it and got onto Wikipedia, and he said, no, St Andrews actually had 20 holes and they collapsed too, blah, blah, blah. And then so I said, how do you know that's right? So where's your research validation on that thing that you're finding online? And so our conversations have stemmed from that piece, which is how do you show your critical analysis of what you're getting back? It's not necessarily AI is a good tool or a bad tool, it's a tool. How do we make sure that you don't get those hallucinations? What are the data that you're checking? How do you critically analyse that? The biggest skill that we will need in the next 10, 15 years is critical thinking. And so we need to, as parents, I think, start those conversations now, encourage them, again, safely to use AI tools, but also be really clear around how do you know that's right? And that, not just from a story perspective, but how do you know what you're seeing on a video or in a photo is actual fact, not just for people who sit in California, but your friends. So step into stuff, be critical thinkers, ask open, clarifying questions for things, and then reserve your judgment to when you need it.
Reserve your judgment. Very critical. What I'm doing with my little girl is, for example, we go out Sunday, we do some activity, and then we spend the whole day out. And we love doing poetry. And what I do is I'll give all the prompts to ChatGPT to create a piece of poem. And then we read that poem, so which creates that sense of use of fun.
Yeah. Well, my son's playing guitar, and so he learns different songs, and we talk about the different songs that he's learning. And I'm waiting for one day for him to, use AI to compose and see what he does with that sort of stuff. And, there is a shame about technology playing a role in that. But if we're being honest with ourselves, it's been doing that for decades.
Yeah.
Just the role that we want to play. How do we actually value that sort of stuff? Our kids are just going to have to navigate stuff differently than what we do. And how do we actually create enough skill sets for them to do that, again, safely and effectively and all that sort of stuff? I think it's a challenge for us as parents.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.